Hey everyone, don't forget to leave a comment letting us know what you thought about the stories and the narration. We really want to hear your feedback to keep improving and bringing you more chilling content. Now, get ready. Let's dive into the stories. I was always the one who fell for the group's pranks. Not because I was naive, but my friends knew how to get to me. This time, the prank would be special. A weekend trip to a remote cabin in the middle of the woods. I should have been excited, but from the very beginning, something didn't feel right. The road there already felt strange. As we drove along the dirt road, the silence was palpable. No sounds of animals, no wind through the trees. Only the noise of the wheels on the dry ground. Dave, the leader of our group and the mastermind behind all our pranks, was beaming with excitement. He had planned this trip for weeks. Emily and Mike, the couple of the group, seemed relaxed, laughing and chatting casually, but I couldn't shake the odd feeling. Maybe it was the isolation, or the fact that I knew I would be the target of another one of their pranks. When we finally arrived at the cabin, I expected to feel some relief, but the sight of the old, creaky cabin, surrounded by the dense forest, only amplified my anxiety. It was as if the place had been waiting for us, quiet and watchful, and that gave me a chill. As we entered the cabin, the uncomfortable feeling didn't subside. The wood creaked under our feet, and the only light came from the flashlights we brought. Dave, always full of energy, suggested we explore the area around the cabin before it got completely dark. Let's take a quick walk in the woods. Nothing major, just to get a feel for the place, he said, winking at the others, making it clear there was more to it. I hesitated but followed the group. As we walked through the forest, I started noticing how still everything was. No movement, not even from small animals. Only our voices filled the void. Then, suddenly, something made a noise to my right. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. "You okay?" Emily asked, noticing my reaction. I smiled nervously and mumbled that I was fine. Night fell fast, bringing with it the absolute darkness of the forest. Dave suggested we head back to the cabin, and feeling uncomfortable, I quickly agreed. However, the light atmosphere they maintained now seemed forced. They were waiting for something, and I knew what. As we made our way back, more noises began to echo through the forest, like light footsteps. I turned around several times, but there was never anyone there. "Relax," Dave said, laughing. "It's just the woods." We got back to the cabin, and while my friends laughed and drank, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else out there, something that wasn't part of the prank. The next night started quietly. My friends seemed relaxed, as if nothing had happened. I tried to get into the mood, but the discomfort from the night before lingered. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was all just part of their game. Even so, the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. "How about another walk in the woods?" Dave suggested, as if he knew I was already on edge. He wanted to test me, as always. Reluctantly, I agreed. Part of me wanted to turn the prank back on them, find a way to scare them instead. So, when we were halfway through the walk, I purposely distanced myself from the group. I could hear their voices fading as I wandered deeper into the trees. Now I was alone, and the silence was even more suffocating. At first, I thought it would be easy to frighten them, but as time passed, the fun faded. I started hearing footsteps again, louder this time. It felt like someone was following me, but when I looked around, there was nothing. My heart raced. Maybe it was Dave, or Emily and Mike, trying to scare me, but what I felt was different. The footsteps seemed to come from somewhere that shouldn't have been there. I started running, thinking I could outrun the sounds, but they only grew louder. When I finally found my way back to the cabin, I was out of breath. My friends were all inside, laughing and drinking like nothing had happened. I asked if anyone had followed me, but they all denied it. "You're paranoid," Dave laughed. But something about the way he said it bothered me. It wasn't the laugh of someone pulling a prank. It was nervousness. The next morning, I woke up earlier than the others. The forest seemed even more sinister in the daylight. There was something about that place that messed with my mind. Dave and the others woke up, still pretending that nothing was wrong. They tried to convince me to go for another walk. I was reluctant but ended up giving in, still hoping to figure out what was going on. This time, the whole group started to show signs of nervousness. We were halfway through the trail when suddenly, everyone stopped. The same noises I had heard before were now echoing all around us. This time, they heard it too. Mike looked around, trying to hide his panic. "What is that?" he asked, but no one had an answer. Dave, who always controlled the situation, was visibly uncomfortable. "It's probably just an animal," he said, without much confidence. The sound of breaking branches grew louder. Emily grabbed Mike's arm, and I realized they were just as scared as I was. Dave, who rarely showed fear, finally admitted, "We should go back." What had started as a prank had become real. Something was there, watching us. Something none of us understood. We returned to the cabin in silence, and the atmosphere had completely changed. That prank, which started as a simple joke, had turned into something none of us could control. That night was unlike any other. None of us could relax. The sound of the breaking branches and the oppressive silence of the forest had invaded our minds. I knew no one would admit it, but it was clear we were all terrified. Dave, the bravest of the group, could barely hide his fear now. His easy laughter was completely gone. We tried to distract ourselves by playing cards and drinking, but the tension was palpable. At some point, the silence was broken again. This time, it wasn't just a distant sound. The heavy footsteps came directly from outside the cabin window. Everyone froze. No one had the courage to go to the window and look. We just sat there, motionless, trying to pretend the sound wasn't happening. But then, we saw the shadow. Tall, slender, much taller than any of us. It moved slowly around the cabin, as if it were circling us, studying us. Emily began to cry quietly, while Mike looked at Dave, expecting him to do something. But Dave said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the door, as if he knew that whatever was outside could come in at any moment. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. A terrifying silence filled the space. We all breathed a brief sigh of relief, but then something slammed hard against the door, making it tremble. We all stood up at once, panic taking over. "We need to get out of here," Dave shouted. No one argued. We grabbed our things in a hurry and ran out of the cabin. As we ran along the dark trail, I felt something behind me. I didn't need to look back to know that the shadow was following us. I could feel its presence, getting closer and closer. The sound of footsteps was right behind, but for some reason, it never fully caught up to us. It was as if it was tormenting us, without ever fully revealing itself. We reached the car almost out of breath. Dave could barely get the keys into the ignition. His hands were shaking so much that he dropped them several times. Finally, the car started, and we sped away as fast as we could, without looking back. No one spoke during the entire drive back. We were all absorbed by the terror of what we had experienced. Back in the city, weeks passed, but that fear persisted in me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow moving between the trees, watching me. My friends tried to move on, but I knew they were also haunted by the fear. Our conversations were never the same again. Something in us had changed. I went back to my routine, but the feeling of being watched never left me. At night, I would hear footsteps in the hallway of my house, the same heavy footsteps from the forest. Even when I was awake, sometimes I thought I saw a shadow in the distance, standing still, waiting. I didn't know if it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me, but something told me that whatever followed us from the forest was still out there, waiting. The trip to the cabin in the mountains seemed like a good idea, especially because all of us, Sam, Alice, Mike, and I, needed a break from the city. As usual, Sam took control of organizing everything. None of us really minded. He always liked to be the leader of the group, but this time, something felt different. The way he insisted on planning every detail made me uncomfortable. as if there was more at stake than just a relaxing weekend. From the moment we got in the car, the sense that something was off began to creep in. Sam refused to stop during the long drive, as if he was in a hurry to get us to the cabin. When we finally arrived, the cabin was surrounded by dense forest, and a strange, oppressive silence filled the air. As soon as we entered, Sam immediately decided where each of us would sleep, like everything had been carefully calculated. I tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave me. Something about the situation felt wrong. Sam's decisions no longer seemed to be about simple logistics. They felt more like control. And though no one said anything, I could tell I wasn't the only one who noticed. The next morning, Sam's controlling behavior became even more obvious. He had planned the breakfast, the day's schedule, and even when we should go for a walk. Alice suggested we head down the trail to the river, a perfect hike for a sunny day. But Sam dismissed her suggestion, replying sharply, "We have more important things to do today." The tension between us started to rise. Mike, who usually kept things light, seemed uncomfortable. He gave me a look, and I knew he was just as bothered as I was. Sam was treating us like pawns in his game, controlling everything around us. And the worst part? He seemed to be enjoying it. The rest of the day was just as strange. Every suggestion we made was quickly shot down by Sam. When I tried to propose something different, he just ignored me and continued doing whatever he wanted. The atmosphere was becoming stifling, but no one had the courage to confront him yet. We were starting to feel like prisoners on a trip that was supposed to be a fun getaway. That night, as we sat down to play cards, the air felt heavier than ever. Alice suggested a different game, but, as expected, Sam completely ignored her and started dealing the cards. His behavior was getting under my skin. "Why don't we try the game?" Alice suggested. I risked trying to defuse the situation. Sam stopped what he was doing and gave me a cold stare. "We've already started this game, so let's finish it." His voice was sharp, and the tension in the room thickened. But what happened next was unexpected. Alice, clearly fed up with Sam's indifference, grabbed the cards from the table and threw them on the floor. "Enough of this. We're here to have fun, not follow your orders." Her voice echoed through the cabin, and for a brief moment, we were all silent. Sam stood up slowly, his fists clenched. What should have been a trivial argument quickly escalated. Before I could react, he shoved Alice hard against the wall. I rushed to break it up, but Sam pushed me aside, sending me crashing into a chair. Looking at Alice, who was visibly shaken, I realized something had changed in Sam. He wasn't just the controlling friend anymore. Something darker had taken over. After the confrontation with Alice, the atmosphere in the cabin became unbearable. The tension was so thick it was hard to breathe. Sam kept acting as if he was still in charge, but now his coldness had turned into something darker, more menacing. During breakfast, I decided it was time to confront him directly. I needed to understand what was happening. "Sam, you need to stop this. We came here to relax, not to follow your every order," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me intensely, as if calculating his response. "I'm doing this for everyone's sake. Don't you see? I'm keeping everything under control," he said with an eerie conviction, as if he truly believed what he was doing was justified. Alice was still shaken from the previous night's incident, and Mike was visibly nervous. We all knew something was seriously wrong with Sam, but none of us were brave enough to fully confront him yet. Then, something bizarre caught my attention. My phone had no signal, and the cabin's Wi-Fi, which had been working before, was now completely disconnected. "Sam, why is the Wi-Fi off?" I asked, trying not to sound too alarmed. "I turned it off. I thought it'd be better for all of us to really disconnect. Isn't that why we came here?" He gave me a chilling smile, one that sent shivers down my spine. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. We were completely at Sam's mercy, cut off from the outside world. I knew we needed to leave, but how? And then, during the heavy silence that followed, Sam grabbed a kitchen knife and started playing with it, running the blade slowly over his fingers, as if daring someone to make the next move. Sam kept twirling the knife in his hand, his eyes scanning each of us as if calculating what to do next. The tension was unbearable, but I knew we couldn't stay still. Mike took a step forward, trying to reason with him. "Hey man, let's just calm down. We're all friends here. We came to relax, remember?" But Sam wasn't listening. In a flash, he raised the knife, pointing it directly at Mike. "None of you are going anywhere. I told you, everything I'm doing is for your own good." Fear gripped Mike's face, and in that moment, something snapped in me. We couldn't keep letting Sam control the situation. I lunged at him, trying to knock the knife out of his hands. The struggle was quick and brutal. I felt the cold metal of the blade graze my skin as I wrestled with him. Sam was stronger than I anticipated, but adrenaline gave me the strength to tackle him to the ground. Alice and Mike screamed as I fought to disarm Sam. I managed to knock the knife out of his grip and kick it away. But Sam wasn't done. He punched me hard in the face, sending me sprawling onto the floor. My head spun, but I forced myself up, dazed, and staggered toward the door. With Sam disarmed and on the ground, we seized the moment. I grabbed Alice's hand, and Mike was right behind us. We bolted for the door, not daring to look back. The night air hit us like a wave of cold reality as we raced toward the car. We jumped in, and Mike started the engine, speeding away from the cabin without a word. The car ride was silent. Each of us was processing what had just happened in our own way. Even though we had physically escaped, the mental scars of what Sam had become lingered. How had our friend turned into this? The trip that was meant to be a break from reality had turned into something much darker. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling of dread whenever I think about how close we came to something far worse. I've always been reserved, with only a few close friends, but Lucas was different. Ever since high school, we were inseparable. He was the kind of person who always knew what to say, always seemed to be one step ahead. Somehow, I felt safe around him, like we had a bond that no one else could understand. But lately, something had been bothering me. It wasn't a matter of distrust, but a strange feeling that crept into my mind whenever I was alone. At home, for example, there was a room I avoided, the guest bedroom. I couldn't explain why, but months ago, Lucas made a comment about it. Something like, "This place feels lifeless," and ever since, I couldn't pass by that door without feeling a chill down my spine. At work, things were going well. Lucas and I were part of a small tech team, and he always stood out. However, there had been rumors floating around about internal sabotage. Nothing too serious, but enough to make my mind race. Was someone trying to undermine someone else? Or was it just paranoia on my part? Either way, the nagging sense that something was off wouldn't leave my head. We worked together at a small tech company. Lucas, with his outgoing nature and easy smile, quickly became the center of attention. People were naturally drawn to him, while I stayed in the background. It never really bothered me, until he started getting closer to Julia. Julia was the only person at work I felt I could truly connect with. There was a spark between us that I didn't have with anyone else, and it was obvious to me that I was in love with her. I never had the courage to tell her, but Lucas knew about my feelings. He knew, and he seemed to enjoy watching me hesitate. Suddenly, he began spending more time with her. At first, it was just quick conversations over coffee, but soon, they became frequent interactions. And the subtle jokes he made about her started to cut like knives disguised as harmless teasing. He smiled at me, but there was something in his eyes that told me it wasn't all just for fun. The atmosphere at work began to change. Small rumors surfaced about sabotage, and somehow, Lucas always seemed to be one step ahead of any problem. The tension was building, both at work and in my personal life. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling that something was deeply wrong wouldn't leave me alone. Lucas was crossing a line, and I hadn't yet realized how far he was willing to go. Everything exploded one night during a company party. The loud music, flashing lights, and casual conversations couldn't distract me from the scene unfolding in front of me. Lucas stood next to Julia, his arm casually draped over her shoulders as he whispered something in her ear that made her laugh. My blood boiled. I felt anger rising inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. As hard as I tried to stay calm, something inside me snapped. I decided to confront him right then and there. I stormed over to him, and before I could think, I grabbed his arm roughly. "We need to talk. Now." Lucas raised an eyebrow, surprised, but didn't resist. We walked over to a more secluded corner, and I turned to face him, my voice shaking with rage. "Are you having fun at my expense? What do you think you're doing with Julia?" He laughed, a low, almost mocking sound. "Man, relax. It's just for fun." That laugh was the last straw. Before I knew what I was doing, I shoved Lucas hard against the wall. He stumbled, but quickly recovered, the smile fading from his face. The tension between us was thick. "Do you think you can just do whatever you want?" I shouted, feeling the heat of my anger pulsing through my veins. Lucas looked at me, his expression now hardened. "You're losing it, man. You're out of control." I stepped back, realizing what I had just done. But the damage was already done. That night marked a breaking point, not just between us, but inside me. And the next day, the consequences hit me like a tidal wave. When I returned to work the next day, everything felt different. My colleagues avoided eye contact, whispering to each other when I walked by. One of my most important projects, something I had worked on for months, was completely ruined. Files were corrupted, documents had disappeared. I went straight to the IT department, but they claimed there was no record of any unusual activity. Something was wrong, and I knew Lucas was behind it. From that moment on, my life spiraled into chaos. I started receiving notifications for meetings that didn't exist or showing up for work appointments only to find out they had been canceled without any notice. My emails were being sent with strange, glaring mistakes that I didn't remember making, and everything around me seemed to be falling apart. It was as if someone was orchestrating my downfall, and I knew exactly who. I tried confronting Lucas again, but he avoided me at every turn. When I finally managed to catch him alone in the hallway, he looked at me with a cold, distant expression. "You really aren't well, man. You're seeing things that aren't there. You need help," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. That was enough to push me over the edge. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall with all my strength. "Stop sabotaging me. I know it's you," I shouted. Lucas pushed back, and for a moment, we were locked in a physical struggle, pushing and shoving each other. His strength was greater than I expected, and he broke free from my grip with a sharp shove. "You're paranoid," he said, his voice low and controlled. "This is destroying you, but you're doing it to yourself. I'm just watching." His words hit me like a hammer. He was enjoying this, watching me unravel, and the helplessness I felt grew stronger by the second. I knew he had the power to ruin my life, and he was doing it without lifting a finger. The anonymous messages, the sabotage, the silent phone calls in the middle of the night, everything was orchestrated by him. It was a game, and I was losing. The physical confrontation in the hallway was only the beginning. My life was in complete collapse. At that point, I couldn't tell what was real and what was paranoia. Everything was blurred, and Lucas seemed to be present in every detail, pulling the strings of my downfall. That night, I received another anonymous call. The phone rang at midnight, and when I answered, there was the familiar silence. But this time, I heard something else. A faint, muffled laugh. My blood ran cold. I knew it was Lucas. He was playing with me. I answered the phone several times, expecting the same silence. But that night, the laughter grew louder, more unsettling. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to his apartment, furious and determined to end this once and for all. When he opened the door, there were no words exchanged. I pushed Lucas with all my strength, slamming him against the wall, causing his head to hit with a loud thud. He tried to regain his balance, but I was beyond reason. I grabbed his shirt and threw him against the dining table, knocking over everything that was on it. Do you think you can do this to me? You think I'm some kind of pawn in your game? I screamed, my face inches from his. Lucas, even hurt, still managed to smile. You've already lost, man. This just proves how far gone you are. The rage consumed me. He laughed again, and the fury I had suppressed for so long exploded. In a blind impulse, I punched him square in the face. The impact was brutal, the sound of bones cracking echoing in the room. But Lucas simply spat blood and laughed once more. I don't need to do anything. You're destroying yourself. That night ended with me stumbling out of his apartment, drenched in sweat. Lucas was hurt, but still intact. His laughter echoed in my mind long after the door closed behind me. I felt broken, both physically and emotionally. Nothing had changed, except that he had proven his point. I had no control. I was at his mercy, even after the physical attack. In the days that followed, I completely lost control of my life. I was fired from my job. No one wanted to be around me. The calls kept coming, and every time the phone rang, I knew it was him, watching, taunting me. I couldn't sleep anymore. The sound of Lucas's laughter was everywhere. The anonymous messages and sabotage followed me, even after we had physically parted ways. Now, I don't even need to answer the phone when it rings. I know it's him, waiting. Lucas doesn't need to do anything anymore. The damage is done. I'm alone, surrounded by the shadows he planted in my mind. The terror he inflicted wasn't physical, it was psychological. And now, I'm condemned to live with the knowledge that he won. I'll never be the same, and he knows it. From the beginning, there was always something about Mark that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't a feeling I could clearly explain, but sometimes the way he looked at us or the way he smiled seemed off. Our group of friends had been meeting for years, usually at the corner bar, that cozy place where the wooden tables creaked under the weight of old conversations and laughter. It was always the same scenario. Sarah was always punctual. Jake never stopped cracking jokes. Melissa sat quietly in the corner, and then there was Mark, the center of attention, always involved in every conversation. I liked that place, but lately, I started noticing things that hadn't bothered me before. The sound of laughter seemed more muffled, the lights dimmer than necessary. And for some reason, every time I sat at that table with my friends, the air around us felt heavy, like there was something in the atmosphere I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the growing tension in the group, something that had been building slowly but no one dared to name. The feeling was subtle, yet inescapable. Something wasn't right. Our group consisted of 4 people. Sarah, always practical and grounded, was the one who kept the balance. Jake, with his impulsive and carefree nature, sometimes went too far with his jokes. Melissa, quieter, rarely opened up, but when she spoke, we all listened. And then there was me, the observer, always paying attention to the dynamics around us. But Mark, he was different. Mark always had this strange ability to know too much about others. He had an odd talent for making comments that cut right to the heart, as if he was always one step ahead, aware of secrets no one had ever shared. There were moments when his jokes crossed the line, hinting at things that shouldn't be said in public. I noticed the uneasy looks from Sarah, the nervous laughter from Jake, but no one ever confronted him. Maybe because, somehow, we knew Mark knew more than he should. It was as if he knew exactly where to push to make us feel small. One day, during a casual conversation about old times, Mark dropped a line that made everyone freeze for a second. "Remember that party, Sarah? I guess no one ever found out what really happened, huh?" The smile on his face seemed innocent, but I saw the discomfort in Sarah's eyes. She laughed nervously, looked away, and changed the subject. We all moved on, but the tension lingered in the air, hanging between us, invisible but palpable. It was on one of those nights, sitting at the bar as usual, when something truly strange happened. We were laughing, sharing stories, when Mark looked directly at me and said something that made my blood run cold. "I guess your brother never really forgave you for that, huh?" He smiled as if it were a casual joke, but the words hit me hard. How did he know about that? It was something I had never told anyone. My brother and I had a fight years ago, and as far as I knew, it was a topic I kept locked away. For a moment, time seemed to stop. My friends kept talking, unaware of the impact of those words. I smiled back, pretending it was nothing, but inside, I was panicking. I started rationalizing. Maybe I mentioned it at some point and just forgot. Or maybe Mark overheard it from someone else. I tried to find an explanation that made sense, but the truth was, I couldn't figure out how he knew. The conversations went on, and I tried to focus, but my mind was stuck on what Mark had said. I watched him from the corner of my eye, trying to catch any other sign that he knew more than he was letting on. But he just kept laughing and joking as usual, as if nothing had happened. The night went on like normal, but the feeling that something was very wrong had already settled in. And for the first time, I began to wonder if the discomfort I felt around Mark wasn't just paranoia. The following weeks brought a series of even more disturbing events. It started subtly, like everything Mark did. He would make small insinuations about Sarah, Jake, and Melissa, revealing secrets no one else should have known. Intimate things, details only someone very close or disturbingly observant could notice. When Sarah casually mentioned she was thinking about changing jobs, Mark smirked and said, "You're worried they'll find out what happened at your last job, aren't you?" Her face went pale. No one else knew about that incident. No one. These comments became more frequent and unsettling. Every time Mark showed up, it was as if he had a new card up his sleeve, something to remind us that he knew more than he should. We all became increasingly uncomfortable, but avoided talking about it. The fear of our secrets being exposed was greater than the desire to confront him. But what truly alarmed me was when he started sending me messages late at night. One night, I woke up to the sound of a notification on my phone. It was a message from Mark. "I bet you wouldn't want people to know about the time you distanced yourself from your family, would you? I'm sure that could cause some problems." I froze in bed, my heart racing. He knew everything. And it wasn't just about me. He had something on all of us, and with each new veiled threat, he tightened his grip. I wanted to respond. I wanted to confront him once and for all, but something held me back. Fear. The fear that if I did, he would expose everything. And the tension only continued to grow, suffocating me more and more each day. We decided it was time to do something. Sarah, Jake, Melissa, and I secretly met without Mark to discuss what we could do about him. No one spoke directly, but the fear was visible in everyone's face. Each of us knew that Mark knew too much, but what we didn't understand was how. How did he have access to so many details about our lives? We all had secrets we preferred to keep buried, and now they were in the hands of someone who didn't hesitate to manipulate us. That night, we were determined to confront him. We decided to force him to tell us how he knew everything and what he wanted from us. When we met at the bar, we pretended everything was normal, as if it were just another regular night. But Mark, as always, seemed one step ahead. He walked into the bar with that unbearably confident smile on his face. As soon as he sat down, before any of us could say a word, he started talking. "I know what you're trying to do," he said calmly, looking at each of us in turn. "You think you can get rid of me? Leave all this behind? I guess you don't understand yet. I know everything about you. Everything." The silence in the bar was deafening. Mark began listing our secrets, one by one, in terrifying detail. Secrets we hadn't even shared among ourselves. Jake froze when Mark mentioned something about the dirty work he had done in the past. Sarah started trembling when Mark brought up a relationship she had kept hidden. Melissa, always so composed, turned pale when he mentioned a legal issue from her past that she had buried deep. I felt a knot form in my stomach when he turned to me. "And you," he said, locking eyes with me, "think no one knows what happened with your brother? I know, and I can destroy you with that information." At that moment, it became clear that Mark had complete control over us. There was no way out. He had us in his hands, and any attempt to challenge him would ruin us. After that night, nothing was ever the same. We continued meeting up as usual, but there was a shadow hanging over us. Every conversation felt heavy, every smile forced. No one felt comfortable anymore, but we all pretended because we knew Mark was always watching, always lurking, waiting for the moment he could crush us. I lost count of how many nights I stayed awake, thinking about how it had all come to this. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, fearing it was another message from Mark, another threat. Every time he approached us, it felt like we were walking on eggshells, avoiding any comment that might trigger his wrath. Paranoia consumed me. I started feeling like I was being watched all the time, not just by Mark, but by something bigger, something invisible that he somehow manipulated to keep us under control. I found myself revisiting old conversations, gestures, expressions, trying to find a clue as to how he had gained so much power over us. But the truth was, there was no logical explanation. It was as if he had always been one step ahead, always knew everything. And the worst part? We couldn't pull away. The thought of cutting ties with Mark was unthinkable, not because we didn't want to, but because of pure fear. Fear that he could truly destroy our lives with a single word, with a single message sent to the wrong people. He didn't have to lift a finger to control us. He simply planted the seed of terror in our minds, and it grew into an invisible prison we couldn't escape from. In the end, I learned a bitter lesson. Sometimes the greatest terror isn't what's out there, but what lives inside your head. And Mark knew exactly how to keep us trapped in our own minds.